For Christmas, my son got Pokémon Scarlet, and since then it's been played a lot over here. And already my impressions of it are torn. And not for the reasons the internet is full of, like performance and bugs. Hi, I'm Dad Plays Games, and let's take a look at the latest and greatest from the Pokémon Company. Right off the bat, I couldn't help but feel, is this really it? The Pokémon Company reported sales of 1.6 billion in 2021, with a gross revenue of 700 million and a net profit of 325 million. The brand itself is listed as the second highest grossing media franchise ever, with an estimated 71 billion US dollars in revenue since its inception, being beaten only by Winnie the Pooh, and not by a lot, while also outshining brands like Mickey Mouse, Star Wars and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And with all that, they couldn't be arsed to do more than this. But don't worry, while I'll begin with the bad stuff, there's also a lot to like here, so stick around. The Pokémon games were never very full of dialogue. The worlds were never that big. And yeah, we do get to create our characters, but the choices are quite limited. There is no voice acting, and the amount of unique assets are surprisingly small. The camera and the controls for it are honestly kind of bad, with things like NPCs or your mount clipping out incompletely at points, getting stuck on rocks and other annoyances like that. The inventory gets bloated with all kinds of crap in no time, and the level design is, well, uninspired at best. Having played games like Genshin Impact, Assassin's Creed, Immortal Phoenix Rising, Far Cry 6 and more this last year, the open world of Pokémon Scarlet feels like an underwhelming indie title. And that's not to shame indie titles. Rather than the big new release from the second most profitable media franchise ever. And I know the Switch isn't exactly powerful. If I remember correctly, it's built on the NVIDIA Tegra X1 chip from 2015. And while a very powerful mobile chipset at the time, it's even reportedly supposed to have been discontinued sometime in 2021. But I can't help but think, is this really all it can do? And while the Paldea region feels kind of fresh to begin with, it's not got a lot going for it to differentiate it from the other regions of the Pokemon universe. There's a clear lack of world design that makes Paldea feel like just any other Pokemon region. It also does its very best to try to sound different, but in reality it's not. Now, my kid is almost 7, and we are Swedish, so while he probably understands more English than most of his peers, he can't really read what's going on in the story and doesn't read English yet. He's learned to recognize which moves are which, but when someone tells him they'll meet him at the lighthouse, he doesn't know that unless there's an adult there to help him. While I can appreciate the openness of it all, a mode to enable more guidance on where to go next is very much needed here, especially for kids. Because while Pokemon isn't a kid's game per se, it is still the main audience. I help him and read and translate for him whenever I can, but I can't be there all the time. And speaking of dialogue, while it's not that great and there are long swaths of gameplay without much at all, when they get talking, they talk a lot, even more than I do. If there was more to enjoy about these characters and the world building, it might be a different story, but at least so far, it's just fluff. They're chatty for no real reason, I feel. Maybe I'll click down the line, but so far, I'm not even telling him how to slow down when he clicks past some of the dialogue anymore, because I've already lost interest way back. The game also has some really strange pacing. All the story seems confined in select chunks of the game, where the normal gameplay loop is completely lacking for the most part. And then follows a bunch of the normal gameplay loop, which is kind of fun, before the next story chunk appears. It's like there's 2 different games spliced into a pool of Pokemon here. And lastly, speaking of Pokemon, some of these new ones, the names and designs of some of them is honestly kind of lazy. They're not bad, but there's definitely room for improvement. I mean, just take a look at Sky Climbers and their Sentius designs. They're excellent. There's plenty of ideas out there still to pad out the decks with. While the music is pretty decent, your classical Pokemon theme with some whimsicality to it, I don't really hear the region very well reflected in it, and it's quite incoherent, at least in my ears. And honestly, the implementation of it in the game is also kind of lackluster. But while there is a lot to criticize the game for, apart from the performance and bugs, as should be apparent by now, it honestly might be the best Pokemon game to come out of the Pokemon Company and Game Freak in years. While Arceus was a test of something new, Scarlet feels more like a full thing. For the first time in forever, the mainline Pokémon is actually a 3D open world. And that matters, because compared to Sword and Shield, Scarlet and Violet feels like actual progress for the series. They took what worked in Arceus and blended it with the classics to create what might be the best Pokémon game since the good old days. And the Paldea region is in theory interesting. The Spanish and Mediterranean influences feel like a fresh air, even if the implementation and result is very much half-assed and uninspiring. The crafting aspects that has been in the game for years by now are finally fleshed out quite decently. And while I'd personally like more depth and less inventory bloat, what's here is kind of solid and works great for kids. And as for the Pokémon themselves, there is no denying that after all of these years, filling your Pokédex with new species of Pokémon exclusive to the region is always good fun. While some are lazily made, there are other worthy additions to the ever-growing roster. After decades of waiting, fans finally got what they've been asking for with Scarlet and Violet in a lot of ways. It is what the series needed. Perhaps 5 years ago, but still, it finally happened. And most importantly, Scarlet is fun. All criticisms aside, at the end of the day, fun is what matters. Ever since I was a kid, I've been wishing for a Pokemon game where you could live out your dreams of being like in the show. Back then, what we got felt about as good as was possible, but technology has advanced since, whereas the games honestly didn't. I'm hoping Game Freak doesn't stop here. More can be done on the Switch, I'm sure, and the next platform should be around the corner. For the next main game, I want voice acting, solid writing, and to be properly able to live out my dreams of becoming a Pokemon master. Game Freak, find that ambition. It can happen. You gotta pass this time. But next time the bar is raised. Pokémon Scarlet is the best bad Pokémon game yet. It could have been the best period, but it's plagued by corner cutting. Should you get it? Maybe. It is fun, but at the same time, there is much not to like. If you love Pokemon or find it at a good price, it's definitely one to play, but don't expect too much. Thank you for... Oh, is that a shiny Pikachu? Hang on.